Okay, so today we're going deep on the headlines from March 24th, 2025 from India. And one thing that really jumped out at me was just how much variety there is.
Yeah.
I mean, we've got everything from, India's kind of growing presence on the world stage to, the always complicated relationship with China. And then we've got deep dives into like, investment strategies and even some pretty interesting cultural and political kind of debates going on.
Right.
It's a lot to take in.
It's a lot. And that's really what we're trying to do here is kind of connect the dots for everyone,
Yeah.
right? To kind of go beyond just the headlines themselves and really like get a sense of what are the bigger trends and forces at play here.
Yeah.
Think of it as like getting a cheat sheet to understanding what's actually going on in India without, having to spend hours and hours reading through news articles.
Exactly. And, as we were looking at all these headlines, some really surprising connections started to pop up. Like, for example, um, that same kind of energy that's pushing a classic Indian soda brand, Goli Soda, onto the world stage, that same energy seems to be fueling India's broader, push to become a global player.
Mhm.
And then you've got this investor who's been patiently holding onto his stocks for over a decade. And that kind of long-term vision, it kind of echoes the long game that's being played in some of these international relationships.
Right.
So yeah, we're going to unpack all of that and more today. So let's kick things off with India's growing role, on the world stage.
Okay.
It really does feel like there's some serious momentum building with all these global engagements.
Yeah. And what's particularly interesting, I think, is just the sheer breadth of these engagements. We're talking about over a dozen countries actively deepening their ties with India. And it's not just, one region or one type of country.
Right.
You've got Cuba, Egypt, New Zealand, Hungary all over the map.
Yeah.
And this is not just about, traditional allies or anything. This really signals that India is becoming a much more important player in a world that's becoming increasingly multipolar.
Right. And it's not just like, diplomatic handshakes and photo ops, right?
Mhm.
We're seeing
Right.
active negotiations for free trade agreements with some pretty big players like the UK and the EU.
Exactly.
So what's the strategic thinking behind all of this?
Well, if you look at the global landscape right now,
Hmm.
there are a lot of geopolitical shifts happening.
Yeah.
There's this growing need for, more resilient supply chains.
Yeah.
And India is really strategically positioning itself as this significant and reliable partner for both trade and investment.
Hmm.
Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman, she actually talked about the increasing importance of bilateralism. And that really underscores this kind of strategic shift that India is making.
Right.
It's about diversifying their trade dependencies
Yeah.
and boosting their own export capabilities.
Yeah.
In a global order that's constantly evolving.
It's fascinating to see how this is actually playing out, with concrete examples. Like,
Yeah.
for instance, you've got Commerce Minister Goyal over there talking with Cuba about biotechnology and renewable energy.
Yeah.
That's pretty forward-looking, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, it goes beyond just, traditional trade goods into sectors that have, huge growth potential for the future.
Right.
And similarly, you've got the discussions with Norway and New Zealand focusing on things like education, tourism, and technology.
Mm-hmm.
And that really highlights how multifaceted these collaborations are.
Yeah.
It's about fostering exchanges and cooperation in areas that can drive innovation and economic development for both sides.
And it doesn't stop there, right?
No, not at all.
You've got engagements with countries like Malaysia, Hungary, Sweden, Egypt, and Belgium. And they're talking about semiconductors, infrastructure, and clean energy.
Yeah, and all of these partnerships, they kind of solidify this diversified approach that India is taking.
Yeah.
They're not putting all their eggs in one basket.
Right. And the visit of Princess Astrid of Belgium, that adds another layer to it, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean,
Uh-huh.
it's not just purely economic.
Mm.
There's a diplomatic and a cultural dimension to all of this.
Right.
These high-level interactions, they signify that India is being proactive in its diplomacy in building this, this network of partnerships that can contribute to greater global stability
Right.
and economic cooperation.
And for, the everyday person listening to this, like, what does this all actually mean?
Well, it could mean access to a wider range of goods and services,
Okay.
potentially new opportunities in emerging industries, and just a greater understanding of how India is shaping global affairs.
So now let's shift gears a little bit and talk about a relationship that's always in the spotlight, the India-China dynamic.
Right.
Prime Minister Modi recently made some comments expressing optimism about, improved ties and a normalization of the border situation, and that really caught my attention,
Yeah.
especially considering all the tension we've seen in recent years.
It's a pretty significant statement, especially given what happened in Ladakh in 2020.
Yeah.
For the prime minister to come out publicly and express optimism,
Right.
it suggests that maybe there's a shift happening in the relationship, or at least a desire to move towards something a little more stable.
Yeah.
And the fact that trade between the two countries has remained so strong,
Right.
despite all the border issues,
Yeah.
it shows how complex and interconnected their economies are.
Right. And we're also seeing cooperation through platforms like BRICS, right? And the resumption of high-level dialogues and even the restoration of border patrols.
Yeah.
Plus Modi and Xi Jinping have, met at those BRICS summits.
Right.
So on the surface, it seems like things are moving in a positive direction.
There are definitely gestures towards normalization.
Yeah.
But I think it's really important to acknowledge the challenges that are still there. The strategic challenges that haven't gone away.
Right.
You've got India deepening its ties with the U.S. while China has this strong relationship with Pakistan.
Yeah.
And those different geopolitical alignments remain a major source of friction.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've got the longstanding issues that haven't been resolved.
Yeah.
Like the border disputes, India's desire to join the NSG, which China keeps blocking, and India's concerns about the Belt and Road Initiative.
Right.
Which they see as a threat to their sovereignty.
So it seems like, even though there's this talk of improvement, those underlying complexities, they're still there.
Yeah, they're not going away overnight.
So what should we be looking for to really gauge, where this relationship is headed?
Well, I think the key thing is to see if there's any tangible progress in the border talks.
Okay.
That would be a major indicator.
Yeah.
Also, we need to see if there's more diplomatic engagement beyond just those multilateral forums like BRICS.
Mm-hmm.
Are they actually sitting down and talking about these bilateral issues?
Right.
That would be a good sign.
Yeah.
We should also keep an eye on the level of Chinese investment in India.
Okay.
And of course, we can't ignore what's happening in the broader region and globally.
Right.
Things like shifts in the U.S.-China relationship or developments in neighboring countries. All of that can have an impact.
And for someone who's not, a foreign policy expert, why is it important to understand all these nuances?
Well, because the India-China relationship has a huge impact on regional stability,
Okay.
economic growth, and even geopolitical alignments.
Right.
Something that could ultimately affect everyone.
All right, let's jump into the world of finance for a bit and talk about Nemish Shah,
Okay.
who's often called India's Warren Buffett.
Mm-hmm.
His strategy of holding on to these midcap stocks, LMW and AIS, for over a decade is pretty remarkable.
It is. It really shows, the power of a long-term investment philosophy.
Mm.
What stands out to me is his conviction in the fundamental strength of these businesses. This isn't about trying to get rich quick. It's about identifying companies that have solid foundations and the ability to grow sustainably over the long term.
Let's take a closer look at those companies.
Sure.
So Lakshmi Machine Works, it was established way back in 1962.
Wow.
And they operate in a bunch of different sectors, the textile machinery, CNC tools, and even aerospace.
Interesting.
Now they've had to deal with some challenges like, rising raw material costs and a slowdown in the textile machinery demand. But their revenue has actually grown quite a bit, from 2,712 crore in FY19 to 4,696 crore in FY24.
Okay.
So that's a pretty significant upward trend.
It is, and what's driving that revenue growth is a strong EBITDA and a healthy net profit growth.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that they're almost debt-free and they consistently pay dividends tells you a lot about their financial discipline and stability.
Right.
Their stock price might go up and down with the market, but the underlying business is solid.
And then there's Asahi India Glass. They're a leader in integrated glass solutions for the automotive and architectural sectors.
Right.
And they've also been growing steadily. Sales have increased from 2,913 crore to 4,341 crore between FY19 and FY24.
Okay.
And their net profit almost doubled during that same period.
Wow.
They've got a strong client base that includes, some major automobile manufacturers, and they're planning some pretty ambitious capital expenditure for FY25. So they're clearly looking to expand.
It sounds like it.
Nemish Shah's long-term bet on these companies, it really shows what can happen when you do your research and have patience.
Yeah.
He found businesses with strong market positions and growth potential, and he just held on to them through all the ups and downs of the market.
It's a valuable lesson for anyone listening, right?
Yeah.
Understanding the core strengths of a company and taking a long-term perspective can really pay off in the end.
All right, let's delve into something a bit more complex now.
Okay.
The debate surrounding historical memorials in India. So you have these contrasting viewpoints. One side wants to build a memorial for Chhatrapati Sambhaji Maharaj,
Right.
and the other side wants to remove Aurangzeb's tomb.
Yeah.
But then you have Union Minister Ramdas Athawal who's suggesting a different approach.
Okay, what's that?
He says, build a memorial, but don't remove the tomb.
Interesting.
It's an interesting perspective, isn't it?
Yes, it really highlights how we deal with historical figures who evoke, strong emotions and different interpretations.
Mm-hmm.
I think Athawal's stance is about focusing on creating something new and positive.
Yeah.
Honoring Sambhaji Maharaj's legacy rather than getting caught up in what some might see as, trying to erase or punish the past.
Right. He also pointed out that Aurangzeb's tomb is protected by the Archaeological Survey of India.
Okay.
And he appealed to the Muslim community saying, they don't have a direct ancestral link to Aurangzeb and that many were historically Hindu.
That's a unique way of framing it.
Yeah, it is.
He's trying to, separate present-day Indian Muslims from a controversial figure from the past and emphasize that they share a history and culture with Hindus.
And by advocating for the Sambhaji Maharaj Memorial while also respecting the existing tomb,
Right.
it seems like he's looking for a middle ground, a way to acknowledge different historical narratives without creating more division.
Exactly. It's about finding a path forward that's sensitive to everyone's concerns.
So this brings up some pretty big questions for, anyone listening.
Yeah. What are those?
Like, how should societies remember and interpret their past? What's the role of historical sites in today's world?
Right.
And how do we have productive conversations about sensitive historical issues?
Good questions for sure.
All right, let's switch gears again and talk about a legal matter now.
Okay.
A family court in Jodhpur ruled that a wife is entitled to half of her husband's income as child maintenance, regardless of her own earning capacity. This was in a case where the wife had accused her husband of harassment and dowry demands.
Right.
So the court ordered the husband to pay $15,000 per month for their son's maintenance.
Okay.
Now, the husband argued that his wife, who has an MA and a bed, is capable of supporting herself and the child. And he pointed to a previous interim maintenance order that was much lower.
Right.
But the presiding officer dismissed that argument,
Okay.
emphasizing that both parents have an equal responsibility to provide for their child,
Right.
regardless of their individual circumstances.
Yeah, this ruling really highlights the importance of shared parental responsibility.
Right.
The court is basically saying that raising a child is a joint financial undertaking, and it shouldn't fall solely on one parent.
And for our listeners, this is an important insight into how the legal system is evolving.
Yeah.
It shows that courts are increasingly recognizing the need for both parents to contribute financially to raising their children.
Exactly. It's a shift towards a more equitable approach to child support.
All right, let's head over to the political arena now and check out what's happening in Delhi.
Okay.
So with the Delhi elections coming up, things are heating up between the AAP and the BJP.
Right, as usual.
Sardar Bharadwaj, who's the AAP's Delhi president, he's accusing the BJP of focusing more on attacking Kejriwal than on actually doing any real work.
Yeah, well, that's pretty typical, isn't it?
Yeah, I guess so.
In the lead up to elections, you often see parties trying to discredit each other. Bharadwaj is basically trying to paint the BJP as being more interested in personal attacks than in addressing the real concerns of the people.
Right, and then you have Arvind Kejriwal himself, who's claiming that the BJP is removing portraits of national icons like Bhagat Singh and B.R. Ambedkar from government offices, while putting up pictures of their own party leaders.
Okay.
He's also criticizing them for not delivering on their promises, like the Mahila Samriddhi Yojana,
Right.
which was supposed to provide $2,500 per month to women.
Okay, so he's using a combination of tactics here. Appealing to people's respect for national heroes and highlighting unfulfilled promises.
Right.
It's all part of trying to undermine the opposition and sway voters.
And he even suggested that there's a secret alliance between the BJP and the Congress against the AAP.
Wow, that's a pretty bold statement.
It is.
It shows just how competitive and sometimes nasty Delhi politics can be.
Yeah.
He's tried to position the AAP as being under attack from both sides,
Right.
which could rally their supporters.
So for someone who's trying to make sense of all this political maneuvering, what are the key takeaways?
Well, I think it's important to understand that this is all part of the game. You know,
Yeah.
parties will use different strategies to try to win elections.
Right.
They'll criticize their opponents, they'll highlight symbolic issues,
Mm-hmm.
and they'll emphasize their own achievements and promises.
Okay, let's move on to something a bit more lighthearted now.
Sounds good.
Remember Goli Soda?
Oh, yeah, that takes me back.
Well, it seems like our favorite childhood drink is making a comeback. Yeah, it's been rebranded as Goli Pop Soda.
Goli Pop Soda.
And PETA is actually promoting it in international markets.
Wow, that's great. I love that they're bringing it back.
Yeah, it's a really cool story. Combining nostalgia with global ambition, Goli Soda holds a special place in a lot of Indian hearts.
Yeah.
And now they're trying to introduce it to a whole new generation of consumers around the world.
That's fantastic.
And they've already made some progress. They're selling it in the US, the UK, Europe, and even the Gulf countries.
Wow.
They've done trial shipments, and they've partnered with big retailers like Lulu hypermarkets.
That's impressive.
And apparently in the UK, it's gone from being this nostalgic drink to like a trendy thing.
Really, that's amazing.
It just shows you the potential for Indian heritage foods and beverages, to find a global audience.
It's true. I think there's a real appetite for authentic and unique culinary experiences.
Yeah, and this is all part of a bigger effort to promote India's diverse food culture and cultural identity on the world stage.
Right. It's about sharing those flavors and traditions with everyone.
Okay, let's shift gears back to the business world for a moment and talk about Boeing.
Yeah, okay.
So they're reportedly laying off a bunch of employees at their BIETC facility in Bengaluru as part of a global restructuring effort.
Oh, wow.
And this is pretty significant because that facility is a major hub for their engineering and technology work outside of the U.S.
Right.
Yeah, the reported layoffs of up to 180 employees.
Yeah.
It just shows you the kind of challenges that Boeing is facing globally.
It's definitely not a good sign.
Now, Boeing is saying that this is just a strategic adjustment, to streamline operations.
Right.
And that it won't affect their commitments to customers or government contracts.
Okay.
They also mentioned that they're creating new rules focused on safety and quality.
Hmm.
But it still raises questions about their long-term plans in India.
It does. Even though they're saying that India is still an important market for them,
Yeah.
these layoffs suggest that they might be scaling back their presence.
And this isn't the first time Boeing has had to make cuts, right?
No, they had a global workforce reduction last year.
Right.
So this is part of a bigger trend.
So what does this all mean for our listeners?
Well, I think it shows how interconnected the global economy really is.
Right.
When a big company like Boeing makes strategic decisions, it can have a ripple effect all over the world,
Yeah.
even in rapidly growing markets like India.
Okay, now let's talk about the future of technology.
Right.
Irfan Pathan, who's the CEO of Perplexity AI, he's calling for India to develop its own AI models.
Interesting.
He wants India to become a global leader in this field.
I think that sense.
He actually talked about this on Nikhil Kamat's podcast,
Okay.
and he's urging India to prioritize homegrown innovation, instead of just relying on foreign technology.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point.
Yeah.
For India to truly become a powerhouse in AI, they need to develop their own capabilities.
Right. And he even suggested that India should create its own version of DeepSeek.
Wow, so like an Indian company that can do advanced AI reasoning?
Yeah, exactly.
That's ambitious.
It is, but he thinks it's possible. He also outlined a roadmap for Indian AI startups.
Okay, what's that?
He says they need more funding, wider user adoption, and investment in data centers.
Right, those are all key ingredients.
And he also pointed out a really interesting opportunity for India.
What's that?
You know how AI voice recognition and synthesis is becoming so big?
Yeah.
Well, he thinks India could excel in that area for Indian languages because of the complexities of all the different accents and dialects.
Right now, that's a challenge for current AI systems.
Yeah, they're mostly trained on Western languages.
Right.
But Srinivas thinks that India's linguistic diversity could actually be an advantage.
Okay, how so?
If Indian companies can create AI systems that can accurately understand and synthesize all those different languages and dialects,
Yeah.
it would be a huge competitive edge.
It would. And think about the potential for creating AI solutions that are truly inclusive and relevant to the local context.
So this is all pretty exciting, right?
Yeah, it's a really interesting time to be following the AI landscape in India.
Okay, now let's talk about a trend that's been happening in the real estate market.
Okay.
It seems like the demand for upscale living is no longer limited to just the big cities.
Hmm.
The premium residential market is growing rapidly,
Okay.
and a lot of that growth is coming from Tier 2 and Tier 3 cities.
Interesting.
Research from Anorak shows that luxury housing, which is, anything above 1.5 crore,
Right.
now makes up a big chunk of new residential launches.
Okay.
And a significant portion of that demand is coming from cities like Chandigarh, Ludhiana, Kochi, Indore, and Ahmedabad.
Wow. So the desire for luxury living is spreading beyond the metros.
Exactly.
So what's driving this trend?
Well, it seems to be a combination of rising disposable incomes
Okay.
and increased investment from NRIs.
Makes sense.
Punjab, for example, is becoming a hotspot for luxury residential projects. And in Ludhiana, they're building these innovative developments that combine premium residences with five-star hotels and high-end shopping malls.
So it's not just about the housing itself.
Right.
It's about creating a whole lifestyle.
Exactly. So this expansion of the premium housing market into smaller cities,
Yeah.
it's a sign that economic prosperity is spreading beyond the traditional hubs.
Right.
And that more and more people are aspiring to a certain level of luxury and comfort.
It's definitely something to keep an eye on.
Okay, now we have a bit of a confusing situation involving the Delhi Fire Service's chief, Atul Garg,
Okay.
and some alleged cash that was discovered at Justice Pharma's residence.
Right.
So initially there were reports that he denied any cash being found.
Okay.
But then he later clarified that he never actually said no cash was found.
So there's some conflicting information
It's
here.
a bit of a mess.
And this is a high-profile investigation
Right.
involving a member of the judiciary.
Exactly. So it's
Yeah.
very sensitive.
Right.
And these discrepancies in his statements, they just create confusion and raise questions about the accuracy of the information that's being shared.
It definitely erodes public trust.
And then you have the fact that there's an ongoing Supreme Court investigation into this alleged unaccounted cash.
Mm-hmm.
And there are reports of burnt Euro 500 notes being found.
So this is clearly a situation with a lot of unanswered questions.
Yeah, it's a developing story for sure.
It is, and I think it highlights the importance of clear and consistent communication,
Right.
especially in cases like this.
All right, let's turn to the world of cricket now.
Okay.
Irfan Pathan, the former Indian all-rounder,
Yeah.
he's been left out of the commentary panel for the upcoming IPL season.
Holy.
Yeah, reportedly because of accusations of bias and making some critical remarks about certain players.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like his commentary and his social media activity were seen as reflecting personal grudges,
Okay.
and that led to some dissatisfaction among the broadcasters.
So this brings up an interesting point about the role of commentators.
Yeah.
They're expected to provide expert analysis and opinions,
Right.
but they also need to be impartial and avoid any appearance of bias.
Mm-hmm.
It's a delicate balance.
And it's interesting that people are comparing this to what happened with Sanjay Mandrekar.
Right.
He was removed from the commentary panel a few years ago for similar reasons.
So it seems like broadcasters are taking these issues seriously.
They are. And Irfan Pathan has actually launched his own YouTube channel, which will probably give him a platform to share his views.
Yeah, that's a smart move. In today's media landscape,
Right.
individuals can leverage these digital platforms to connect directly with their audience.
So this whole situation is kind of a reminder that even in a role like commentary,
Right.
public figures are under scrutiny,
Yeah.
and they need to be careful about how they conduct themselves.
It's a good reminder for everyone, really.
Okay, finally, let's end on a fun note.
Okay.
Did you know that Brahmanandam, the veteran Telugu actor,
Oh, yeah. The king of comedy.
yeah, he's reportedly the richest comedian in India.
Really?
His net worth is even higher than some of the biggest Bollywood stars.
Wow. I had no idea.
I was surprised, too.
That's amazing.
Yeah, he's been in over 1,000 films.
1,000 films.
Yeah, and his estimated net worth is 500 crore.
That's incredible.
It's about $60 million.
Good for him.
It's really remarkable when you think about it. You know,
Yeah.
he's even richer than Kapil Sharma, who's like super popular across India.
Right.
But Brahmanandam's success has largely been in Telugu cinema.
It just goes to show you the power of regional film industries.
Yeah.
And the fact that success in entertainment can transcend language and regional boundaries.
Exactly.
Brahmanandam's story is a celebration of the diversity and richness of Indian cinema.
And it's an inspiration to anyone who dreams of making it big in entertainment.
Absolutely.
So that was quite a journey, wasn't it?
We covered a lot of ground today.
We did. We went from global partnerships to historical debates to legal rulings to political battles and even the world of cricket and comedy.
It's amazing how all these different threads are woven together.
Yeah, and each of these stories gives us a glimpse into the complex and dynamic reality of India today.
Right. It's a country that's constantly evolving and changing.
And it's exciting to think about what the future holds.
It is.
We've talked about India's growing role on the world stage
Mm-hmm.
and its push to become a leader in AI.
Right.
So it makes you wonder what kind of amazing things might happen when those two forces combine.
Yeah, that's a great question.
Yeah.
What new innovations and collaborations will emerge?
Then we have these ongoing discussions about historical figures
Right.
and the rising aspirations for a more luxurious lifestyle.
Yeah.
It really makes you think about how India's identity is evolving.
It does.
Yeah.
What do these trends tell us about the values and desires of the people?
So we encourage you to keep thinking about these connections and what they might mean for you and for India in the years to come.
It's an ongoing conversation.
This deep dive is just the beginning.
It is. The process of learning and discovery never really ends.
There will always be new headlines to explore, new connections to make.
And new insights to gain.
So keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep.
That's the key.
Thanks for joining us.
That's everyone.